And we'll pause this so we don't get copyrighted. All right, so just to kind of get into the thick of it, guys, some of you guys may have noticed I dropped the site model this Wednesday. So I do have it open up today, and it's just the two-dimensional version, if you take a look at the perspective. I'm going to try my best to not make this like a super basic tutorial. To be fair, if you've never used Rhino before, guys, seriously, Professor YouTube and literally my YouTube channel, just watch exercise 1 through 3, and I swear, you'd be way better off than I was when I was learning Rhino in 2 weeks by myself off of somebody who was not architecture. But in our case, as I mentioned before, there's some really unique stuff that we can do, but it's not like a magic button in any sense, but it, I think, arguably is definitely helpful. But the first thing that I want to show is actually this thing called Food for Rhino. Now, this is something I only usually show in my computer graphics and really only briefly, but if you type in food for the number 4 and Rhino, it is awesome. It's basically got all this open software and all these different plugins, anywhere from China to Taiwan to Australia. There are people writing their own programs and their own algorithms. And again, the reason we use Rhino is just because of literally how open source it is. And if you want to close it, you can close source some things too. But in our case, we're going to be using this thing called parking today. So if you just typed in parking, it's called Parking Square. So it's this little guy right here. You'll notice it's also on the Miro page. And I'm not going to load the Miro page right now, but it's also on this week's Miro page. But Parking Square is what we'll be using. However, to install it, you actually have to use Rhino, right? So you could either do this on the school computer or even on your personal computer. And the first thing that you want to type in is package. So it's going to bring up Package Manager. And essentially, Food for Rhino is brought to you by McNeil and Rhino. So actually all of that stuff is already in the program. You just need to install it. So like if you wanted Castor, and you just literally install it. Can't tell you how easy that is. However, if you accidentally still have one of my student versions, this ain't gonna work for you, right? So keep that in mind. It's not actually connected to the network. So you realistically, if you download it from the website and take it in manually, you can do that though. But this installation probably isn't gonna work for you. But if we type in PRK for parking, you'll see that Parking Square is there. And I've already have it installed, so I'm not going to go ahead and uninstall it. But again, Package Manager is definitely the way to go. Now, once you have that ready to go, you can type in Grasshopper. Yes, Grasshopper is already inside Rhino, and it'll basically load up as soon as you do so and bring you to the screen. You'll also notice in Miro and our Google Drive, so I went ahead and just gave it to all the studios. It's okay, they won't know how to use it unless they watch this video. But it makes a lot of sense. I mean, just give it to everybody. It's not like a magic button or anything, but I do think it's going to be extremely helpful. So I've actually made the file for you and everybody. That way you don't have to do any of the math work or any of the heavy lifting. So you'll open up this file and you'll see that it immediately populates, at least in this case. So let's talk about how this works a little bit and maybe turn off our topography layers. That way you can see that a little bit better. But as you can see, it's automatically generating based on some geometry that I've given it, right? And in fact, it'll do that over and over again in real time. If I wanted it to be angled, I could literally come up with every single parking space that there is imaginable. However, like I said, it's not a magic button, right? Obviously, I wouldn't probably want to keep these because, well, they don't make any sense. And let's face it, that would be hilarious to make 2 trucks park there. But in our case, this might be very useful, right? Being able to see that, oh, okay, well, I know that I do want an aisle, and maybe I want people to be able to drive through there, drive through here, maybe a drop off here, and see their way out. Now, obviously, that doesn't make any sense. Neither does that or that one. So I would actually end up just deleting those, right? So again, I'm not saying it's going to magically make your parking lot, but boy, does it make it a lot easier. So just to cover this a little bit, you'll notice in the Rhino file, in the Grasshopper file, let's make that a little bit bigger. You'll notice a couple things. So it's a program, obviously, and it's got its variables, it's got its input component to an output component, and essentially turns into a baked curve. Now that's really great because that's the part you really need to worry about, and the only part you really need. That's our output. For our input today, you'll notice that we have basically a little parking space, about 10 by 18. That is probably the number I would choose for this project. Honestly, if you wanted to make it even easier, I would go with 20 by 10, right? Something super, just 2 squares, right? Nothing to run home to. But in our case, you'll notice the way that I input something, right, is actually right click and setting multiple curves, right? So I'd basically select these, right click, and set multiple curves. When I do so, it basically turns it into this object, this curved object that goes in through a series of mathematical equations and of course spits them back out in a specific order, sometimes even a specific rotation. The next thing to be cognizant of is of course the other curves, such as our boundary. So that basically is the boundary of the parking lot that I want. Let's say, well, maybe I want something actually square. So I'm gonna actually make another square. Maybe I want a parking lot over here and a parking lot over here. I don't know. Maybe I put them together. I mean, shoot, why not? So I'll take that piece, I'll explode them, and basically trim them down. So in my case, trim, 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 trim. Oh man, I kind of wanted that one. We'll extend for that one. Boop, boop, and of course some trim. Now I'd want to put those all together as a single, source or boundary. So in my case, I'll just hit join, and anything that's actually not connected won't join. But anything that is connected, of course, will join. Of course, you learn that pretty quickly in computer graphics. But let's reset our boundary, for instance. I'll right-click and clear values, because I want to clear out that previous value that I gave it. Right-click and basically set one curve. In my case, now it is only within this position. However, keep in mind it does update in real time. So, I mean, again, extremely useful. Obviously, I have some buildings in here, for the sake of tutorial. So let's get some buildings in there. So I need to basically tell the computer, hey, I want some buildings in there. Let's get rid of this old boundary. And I don't know, maybe I actually want the parking to get really close to the buildings. So I'm gonna get maybe my boundary, let's get this over here. Maybe that one building is inside. And basically move that boundary. Now, as you can see, it's kind of trying to go around it. And like I said, I'd probably end up getting rid of this one, probably getting rid of that space and that space because, well, it's kind of colliding with it. Again, it's not a 1-2 situation. The next piece is, of course, let's get the buildings in there. So building, building, building. And I think they're already set in this case. So set multiple curves. But again, what's really nice is I can easily move my building and it automatically updates my parking. As you can see, sometimes great, sometimes not so great. So it is what it is. But I've actually already set some of these parameters for you because, well, not only do they work pretty well, but also that way you don't have to worry about all the ADA and all the different parking requirements. However, I did put also a diagram to make that a little bit easier, and maybe I should have just pulled up Miro in the first place. Just it usually goes so slow. Let's see. All right, not too bad. So I did put up this little diagram just in case you really want to get into the thick of it, but that's essentially all of these right here. So your grid angle, boom. Let's go with 0, right? Stall width. And keep in mind that basically it works as like a grid pattern and it essentially fills some with parking spaces, right? I mean, that's essentially it. I mean, honestly, you could do whatever you wanted, right? I mean, if you wanted to do something else or trees or, I mean, you could really start to think about those kinds of things. But again, a small diagram to, of course, express what these settings are actually doing and how they actually relate to the overall system. But again, I think pretty useful. Aisle, I think that goes without saying. Obviously, the aisle being, somewhat of a, the cars go this way, the cars go that way, and they exit. So relatively speaking, you do kind of have to draw these things out, whether with curves or Boolean splines, but entirely useful. However, if that just seems absolutely complex and does not interest you whatsoever, the next best way to do this is to quite literally just put a picture in and mimic it, copy it, use it, right? In our case, some of us may not know this, but you can type in picture, enter, and of course grab a picture from the internet or screenshot, whatever floats your boat. So in my case, I do have this typical San Antonio parking lot. I honestly picked this one just because it had clear lines and they were all straight. However, if you wanted to choose something that was a little bit more, angled or difficult, or complex, you're of course more than welcome to. But before I get ahead of myself, let's go ahead and show you how to produce these. Obviously, if you know Grasshopper, you know that you have to click on the output, right click, and bake it. Why it shows a fried egg, I'll never know, and why it's called bake. Anyway, doesn't make a whole lot of sense there, but in our case, it's going to ask what layer do you want to put it on, and that's fine. In my case, I'm going to go with layer 5 because I don't think I have a parking, I guess there's already a parking square. But let's go ahead and produce it. And in my case, I'm going to turn my preview off by clicking that gray piece. Now these are pretty much set in stone, right? Well, for the most part, right? Because now it's simply taken that piece that I already created and it really has just multiplied it. So I can still kind of come back and delete some. Let's say that seems really monotonous. Can you imagine all these cars parked? And I can still manipulate it, right? Maybe I can even take a certain amount at a time and start to even move them down, right? If you've ever been in a parking lot, and I'm sure we all have, you know that sometimes they're actually equally spaced by trees and other sitting areas, or again, something to make it maybe less parking lot-y, right? Such as this image. As you can see, it's just solid concrete jungle going on. Well, oh, thank goodness they gave us a little tiny strip of grass to make us maybe just not die in the, the soul so fast. But in our case, you can see that there's actually a lot of good examples here. I mean, don't get me wrong, I would have turned that into a park pretty easy if I was in charge. But it also gives us the scale figures of cars. It also shows how bad people park. But in our case, it gives us a good scenario of actually what we can measure and what we can start to understand of how a parking lot works. Can't express this enough that without the internet, I wouldn't be here talking to you. Most of it was actually just self-learning, right? Looking what other people are doing, literally precedents, right? So once we've baked that, we can really close Grasshopper. We don't necessarily need everything still, so you don't necessarily need the boundary, and let's say that was my buildings, and I'd essentially just get rid of the things that I know that I don't need. So in my case, yeah, that's looking a little monotonous. So fake it till we make it, and that's actually looking pretty cool, but also kind of impossible. I'd probably put a park here, right, or maybe even a roundabout. Maybe get ARC or an arc, click, click. Well, not that one. I'd maybe find my center point between these two, which is pretty easy. I could just draw a line. ARC, find a midpoint, and voila. So what I'm trying to say is draw it here first, and if I lost my pen, you can actually draw it as well. So for instance, that's actually how I did the topography, was simply using a spline itself, and of course being able to draw in Rhino is so much quicker, I think, on the Wacom, but it does take some getting used to, right? But if that's your style, another way to do it is polygonal, right? So in my case, I'm always holding shift, you guys know, but I could start to draw my floor plan even, or even start to get a better idea of what I want to do. I mean, don't get me wrong, on Wednesday I'm not expecting your final floor plan. I'm expecting just some drawings here. And let's face it, we're gonna have to manipulate it. We're gonna have to iterate. So I know a lot of us, we sort of automatically assume that digital means final, and that's not necessarily the case. It's just a different tool. It's just arguably one that has to be plugged in. It's like a drafting table, but has to be plugged in. So anyway, not to get too far into it, but hopefully that's making some sense in terms of using Grasshopper. Right, pretty simple, and I even give you both of those files. I give you the test file, like the one that I'm working on right now, and of course the Grasshopper file as well. So, enough said, at least about that. The next thing that I would do is quite literally just trace it. So in many cases, I mean, don't get me wrong, if I bring in an image from the internet, I do need to set it to some sort of scale. And as you guys know, I basically said, well, go with 10 feet by 18 feet, and we can basically find out what this is today too, if I put a measurement on Google Earth, but I didn't. So at least for the sake of tutorial, we'll fake it till we make it for today. But in my case, I want to make a 10-foot line because I'm just going to set that to 10 feet. So 10 feet, enter. I'm going to hold shift to make it straight. And as you can see, my image is definitely too big, right? So I'm going to set one point there. Boom, that little, I'm going to fake it till I make it. It's pretty close to the centerpiece. Well, there's kind of an optical illusion going on there. Anyway. I'll take the next part, I'll click on the image and type in scale, enter. It's going to ask me for a base point. Sweet. Obviously that's the point in which both of these are true, both the image and the line. So that would be this point. It's going to ask for the reference. Hey, what are you trying to reference? Well, I'm trying to get this side of the image to go to 10 feet. So obviously I'll have my grid snap on and basically snap to that grid. Now when I measure this, or DIM for dimension, click, click, and whoa, 3,048 millimeters. Well, that's pretty close. But if you double click on these, you should be able to change them. If you can change it. There we go. Nope. Oh my goodness. This is what happens when you screen record. It doesn't know what you want to click on. There we go. So if you do want to change it, make sure you go to length units. Instead of millimeters, of course, go to feet and inches, and voila. Now, I was pretty sure I set my global settings to that, but I guess not. But in your case, somebody might have done that on your computer already, or you might have done that yourself already as well. But now this is looking pretty sweet because, well, now I can assume that, well, essentially all of these are 10, and, well, I can use DIM, and I can get other dimensions as well. So, for instance, oh my gosh, I got to do this to every single one. Anyway, you really start to learn millimeters, right? Actually, I want to check. What is it? Length units. And maybe just so you see that again as well. Hey, pretty close. Usually about 20, right? So 19 by 10, and really it honestly depends whatever that first unit that I set it to. So again, fake it till you make it. Can't express that enough. But very instantly I could just trace this. So, I mean, for the most part I do work a lot with the mouse, but especially when it comes to drawing, shoot. I mean, there's just so many things we can do. We can also give it some opacity. I don't know, some of us probably know this, but if you go to the properties wheel, the little paint tube, and you give it some transparency. Now, of course, you have to have that enacted. And of course, before I trace anything, I always lock my layers. And if you need to unlock it, unlock. So again, trying to cover at least some of the basics. I know some of us haven't even taken or even probably used Rhino yet, but I find it to be absolutely amazing. So in my case, I'm just going to draw some lines. I can type in line. And spacebar is going to reenact the same command. So if I hold shift, to be fair, I don't have to do this all day either. I could actually just make two, copy, and basically copy that over and over again. Oops. Copy, click, and basically fake it till I make it. But as you can see, that is a little bit more tedious than just trying to at least get something out of Grasshopper, right? Now, some of this have multiple boundaries. We have multiple spots that we want to envision the parking. So by all means, do that Grasshopper thing twice on 2 different borders, right? Or trace it, right? Move the image and voila. We'll take a regular line and we'll answer Brandon's question. What do you got, Brandon? Nah. It's just the dimensions of that parking lot. You know how it like made some on that angle that was a little weird and it made some over here? There's nothing in Grasshopper to control that ever so manually. What you would do is bake it and delete stuff that you don't need, right? Or add stuff that you want, right? So for instance, maybe you just need to get a long line of them. Don't sit there and like copy, 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 or array, because you're more than likely to actually make a mistake in that case. But yeah, use what it does well. If you don't need parking spots here, sorry, let me get this layer locked. Yeah, if you don't need these, just delete them. You know what I mean? Or you don't want 2 right here, shoot, delete them, right? You don't want no curb stops, get rid of them. You see what I mean? But that could be enough to, of course, even just get started. Now, I really recommend drawing in Rhino, and thank you for the question, by the way. But yeah, don't get me wrong, some of it's, of course, just manual, right? Good question. You can also draw it, right? You can also skew it. So for instance, if you highlight any line and you do function F10, you can actually take the points and move them as well. So for instance, if I wanted to angle them, voila, right? Again, kind of fake it till you make it. I can't express to you how long that would actually take on a drafting table compared to what I just did. It's a time saver. That's why we use these, because time is money, especially in the professional world. However, some of us may just have a sketch. So I actually asked to borrow Brandon's previous sketch. So let's go ahead and get that in here. We'll type in picture, enter. Keep in mind, it's not going to take a PDF so well. A PDF's not really a picture. It's actually half raster and half vector image. They're better at exporting things and putting them into Illustrator rather than importing PDFs to Rhino is just hectic in most cases. I don't really recommend it. It is possible. I just don't really recommend the headache. But in our case, I do have this wonderful design, idea number 2, sweet. We'll go ahead and take that, click, click, and see how close I got. Not even close. That's okay. Now, what's nice about Brandon's is he was able to actually take the image that I previously had and start drawing on it, right? It makes a lot of sense because now I can actually line that back up to it digitally. Again, there's just something great about digital software, I think. Scale, in my case, my base point, again, the one that's, fairly close. And I want this one, boop, and I want it to be about this big. Voila. Of course, I do want to turn some stuff off so we don't all suddenly have a seizure. There we go. Obviously, I don't need some of these buildings. But as you can imagine, I could start tracing this up quite literally, right, in the most holistic sense available. I could also start to get rid of stuff that I don't want or want to look at. So for instance, this is why I really like Rhinos, because I can do whatever I want. So like for instance, maybe I just want this part of the image. So let's just get this part of the image. Sorry, Brandon. Of course, this is not what I'm trying to tell you guys what to do. In fact, I'll kind of do my best to not do that. Because at the end of the day, I want you to feel like you designed it, not me. Anyway, I forgot where I started. Is it right here? Can't be that one. It's this one, right? Yeah. Okay. What was I thinking? Let's get back in there. Boop, 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 boop. Fair enough. So we'll take that whole piece and we can trim it. Trim. And we can click on the part of the image that we don't need. I don't know about you, but I've done that in like 3 hours on Illustrator trying to do that, rather than just like making a shape, trimming it off, and using it, right? This is almost like my scratch table. It's my drafting table. It's just, it happens to be a screen that I can zoom in and zoom out. But let's say that's what I actually did want to keep. Let's start drawing it. Well, I don't want to trim it out. So again, I can't mess up. Command Z. In my case, I do want to lock that in place, but not before I give it some transparency. So again, I'm going to go to Properties, my little paint tube, and of course give it plenty of transparency. More often than none, I don't actually need that much of the color. And I really appreciate seeing the grid behind it. So again, don't get me wrong, some of us are probably already a little familiar with this on the iPad, but it's a little bit different, right? It's of course a lot more accurate. In fact, let me show you what I mean. So the first things first, well, I probably want to set, at least in Brandon's case, probably the center, right? And maybe even find the center. So how do we do that? Well, there's a couple of ways to make a circle. In fact, there's like, oh my God, 11 ways. Sorry, 8, 9, 10. At least 10 ways to make a circle. But as you can see, you might want to pick the one that actually makes sense to you. For instance, this 3-point circle, that sounds like a good idea because I can take this point, and this point, and actually get a perfect circle, at least between those 3 points. Now, as you can see, it's not an exact curvilinear element, and that's fine. That's not his actual final idea, but if he was starting to draw it, my goodness, why wouldn't it be perfect? We can do that already. The next thing I can do is, of course, obtain the thickness of some of these items. So offset. I don't really have to know the distance. I could actually click distance and set my own. So for instance, maybe I want this thickness right here, so I'm going to click there and fake it till I make it about right there, and voila. See what I did there? Made that exact distance for this one. Now maybe I do that again for the exact distance of the other. So I'm going to hit distance, and maybe I want this piece to that piece. Sweet. Got that one. Maybe I want that piece. So again, distance, and you can actually hit the letter D as well. But maybe I just need that distance right there. Sweet. And already, I mean, don't get me wrong, you can also hide stuff over and over again, but you could just set things to layers too, right? I mean, you could just easily toggle on and off some of these layers. Like I would just set an image layer. Let's go ahead and do that. New layer, image. Oop. I guess you don't have to spell image correctly, but you probably should. But I'm not going to waste time on tutorial. We got 15 minutes. Let's go as fast as possible, because I do want to start drawing this. We'll set that layer, change object layer. And as long as we're not drawing in that layer, so for instance, yeah, now I would literally start with walls, windows. Sometimes I'll even make the layers first. That way I kind of know what to look for and what color, and it just kind of keeps me on track. We'll do some red walls today. Why not? But again, if I'm on walls, of course I can turn off and turn off that image pretty nicely. It's like Photoshop, Trace Morpholio, and essentially a lot of other programs put all together into one. But that might be enough to get started. Now, I may no longer need this, so I'll get rid of it, right? No big deal there. Pretty sure I still have my image. Yep. So again, I don't necessarily need the border and that piece, but now I could really start to work with this. The next thing that I could do is maybe set my center point. Now that I know it, I'll use center and basically just a regular line. So it's going to find that center no matter where I'm at, right? No matter what circle I'm at, it's going to be like, hey, is this what you mean? Is this what you mean? Is this what you mean? So again, that's kind of nice. In my case, fake it till I make it. I'm just going to try and get relatively some of the pieces. Now you'll see it just keeps hitting on the center. That might not be what I need, so I might want to limit actually some of my options and try that again, right? You can actually make it perfectly perpendicular, so that's kind of nice too. But once you have your center point, you don't necessarily need your center point over and over again. So fake it till you make it. And in my case, the reason I chose at least Brandon's is that's a little bit more difficult. It's radial, right? And some of us might be doing some difficult things. Of course, these are actually all just wall lines, and eventually I could turn them into construction lines. I could really start to make it look as if somebody actually drafted that. In fact, if you've ever taken my computer graphics, I express this a lot, that nobody likes digital drawings. They look too clean, they look too perfect, they look too calculated. And very often you kind of want to give it that Toy Story 4 look and actually add some of the dirt, the detail, and some of those things. But starting to look pretty good. And of course you guys start to know your designs pretty well, but I'll take essentially everything, trim, and get rid of the things that I don't need. Now, of course, I'm just kind of faking it till I make it today. But once I establish some of these things, right, it's not too difficult. Honestly, I can't remember your drawing too well, but sake of tutorial, right? I don't know, I kind of like those lines there. But again, you don't necessarily have to trim them. You could actually draw right on top of them again. So that's looking pretty sweet. So, well, let's turn it into something, right? But I don't necessarily want to offset that all over again. So in my case, I'm just going to join them. How thick is a wall? Well, anywhere from a foot to 6 inches. So in my case, maybe I offset it and I type literally a foot, so 12 inches, enter, and voila, right? I start to have actually some of my wall systems. Right click and change object layer. But as you can see, really nothing to it, right? In terms of getting even just a drawing that you just did on your iPad, maybe it was all sketchy. One thing I would recommend is make sure when you're doing those drawings, draw it on something that is digital, that preferably I even gave you, right? I mean, such as the site model. Print that bad boy out at 1/32, dude, Bob's your uncle, right? But in our case, right, I may want to continue and start working with the floor plan. I might want to start actually thinking about what actually goes on in here. So maybe it is another circle. Maybe I do need that center button again. Boop. Maybe there's a central courtyard. So on and so forth, right? But the next thing, again, we don't necessarily have to get rid of drawing either. So, I mean, one thing I can definitely appreciate is the accuracy of drawing, but being able to take my center now and quite literally draw the path that I want. I can't tell you how many times I've tried to draw this path out of making like certain arcs or certain elements or things like this, only to realize like it just looks kind of sad. But another thing that's nice about this is it brings us control points, something that I can also manipulate and vary. Making some sense? It's looking a little funky. You can also offset these too. Let's say I wanted this was a sidewalk, for goodness sake. Let's say it's 6 feet, and voila, I have a 6-foot sidewalk. Right? Maybe it actually terminates here. See what I mean? So not too bad, right? Especially for some of us, if you've never used this before, you're like, oh my gosh, you know, Pandora's box going on right now. But what else? What else can I show you guys? Obviously, we can start doing the floor plan, and I do want to kind of show a couple of things. So a little bit more detailed, like let's say this was, you know, just a regular stud and board, 12-inch wall, you know, but maybe I want to line it with stone. Oh, sweet. But I don't want to line all the pieces with stone, so I'm going to go ahead and explode it. And I just maybe want this back wall to be stone. That'd be cool. So I'm going to get rid of the, well, I can actually probably put those two together, join. Just because I want one continuous block of stone. Join again, or I could hit spacebar and it'll join again. A lot of the times I have this in my hand while I'm on my mouse, right? Because I actually control my mouse with my thumb, but some people, of course, it actually makes a lot of sense because you can kind of do both, right? So that way you're kind of always at the ready. You can also click the button of the pen, and it's your right click, and you don't actually touch the screen because then it won't actually move. But if you hover around the screen, basically, you know, again, just a game changer. It's a digital drafting table. That's essentially what it is. But let's make a stone wall real quick, and of course get this bad boy into Illustrator to show you the real potential of this program. So offset, and let's go with a 6-inch wall, 6-inch stone anyway, and let's maybe close that off, and maybe let's wrap it as an architect really would. Fake it till I make it, and come around a little bit, and get that perpendicular. Again, I can't express that these tools are your very best friend. However, please never use near. It just does not work out so well. Let's see if I can do something cool today. Mirror this. I'm going to take the midpoint of this line, hopefully. Boop. And the midpoint of this other line are perpendicular. And do some math. Look at that. Right? You can get it immediately to the other side. However, once that's done, maybe I want to actually poche it. Well, how do I poche in Rhino? Anybody know? Hatchet. Thank you, guys. Tell who's paying attention. In my case, my favorite tool, boundary mode. And it's going to be like, hey, bro, what do you want to be filled in? Well, I may actually want both. So maybe I want this one to be stone, enter, apply. And I'm going to actually do it again and hit enter again, right? And maybe I want this one to be, I don't know, a series of lines. And maybe I want those lines to be at 45 degrees. Again, I can't express enough how much easier this is than drafting, right? I mean, don't get me wrong, I love drafting, especially when I was here at SAC, but my goodness, just too many hours on the drafting table, and then I'd ruin the drawing like an idiot, right? And then be like, oh my God, I gotta do it again. And you know, that adds up, that frustration really does. However, oh man, I forgot to add some windows. That's okay, right? So let's get some windows in there. Again, you'll see that I kind of just base it. Like maybe it's a 6-foot window, so I'm going to offset 6 feet. Boop. And maybe we have a series of windows. I mean, why not? Copy. We've already got that distance in there. And maybe I kind of want like a rhythm going on. That sounds cool. So I'm going to take those. Boop. I'm going to copy it because why would I do that over and over again? In fact, actually even better. Copy. I can take the same point. Actually get that going. Now, obviously I'd want to rotate this and actually get a perfect angle. And if you did really want to do that, you could take any line, divide it, or in my case, explode this first, otherwise it's going to get all of them. I'd take this one, maybe divide, and I don't know, what do you say? How many windows do we need? But you see what I mean here, right? Obviously we could divide the window, we can get it pretty dang perfect. We can also start to create lines and really make it perfect. I mean, don't get me wrong, we'd find the center point, and Brandon has a whole can of worms to really mess with. What's kind of nice about using a radial pattern is you could have multiple center points, but also it's just fine having one general one that you always lock into. That would mean that his interior walls are definitely not like this, right? Because that would be a weird triangular room versus a very weird triangular room. you'd probably want to maintain some sort of perpendicularness. I don't think that's a word, but it is a word for today, right? So I'd maybe want to maintain that. And in his case, if you did that by 12 inches, you could actually start to know how much feet is in a room, at least in a radial sense. But again, offset. Typical walls are about 6 inches, guys. And then exterior walls in your case are probably about 12, depending on, in like my case, probably 18 inches because I added stone to the exterior of that. But again, let's get some windows in there. That was the original go. So trim, T-R-I-M. And that's where I'd start to basically get rid of either the curve. I'd probably keep the curve and just actually get rid of the hatch. Boop, boop, boop. Sorry, I say boop a lot because my 3-year-old just like loves it. But in my case, there's a couple of work. I mean, don't get me wrong, I may want to actually keep these lines and give it that kind of like sketchy look. I mean, I know I'm talking a little computer graphics for some of you. But again, I want to almost fool somebody that I made this on a drafting table. Seriously. Now, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of things you have to do to make it really look like that and really fool somebody, but it's kind of hilarious when Escamilla comes up and goes, wow, good drafting, and you're like, no, that's actually all just Rhino and Photoshop and Illustrator. So again, just so that I can get something to show you in Illustrator that we can start to manipulate with, I'm kind of just spitballing here a little bit. Obviously, it's not my design, and you guys will know your design a little bit better. Oh, forgot to get rid of the middle piece there. So trim, boop, boop, and voila, a solid and void relationship just like that. One thing I like to express that has saved me hours of time is this wonderful filter tool right here. For instance, you see all these points. I don't want to take these points into Illustrator, so I'm going to disable my filter. I'm going to select only points, and so what you click on is actually essentially what it'll only select, which is fantastic because, man, I've got a lot in there, and I just want the points out. Voila. So again, I can't express how great filter is, and I know I'm going extremely fast. Again, it is recorded, so feel free to pause the video and, of course, see what I'm clicking on and things like that. What else? So actually what's really great about this too is I can immediately take a piece. Oh, be careful, right? Make sure you disable that again. Otherwise, it's like, bro, you're not selecting any points. I can't. So in our case, I may need that piece again, and I probably shouldn't have exploded it. That's okay. We'll take basically the exteriors of my walls. However, if I was being really organized, I would actually have walls and pochets and a poche layer and maybe a stone wall layer. I'm not kidding, guys. Eventually you want to be the god or goddess of organization when it comes to these things. And I really wish somebody would have just told me that when I was a student because I was not organized at all. So in my case, I'm going to join those back together. Not a big deal. And let's take a look at it in 3 dimensions. Some of us, I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm not expecting a digital model, especially a 3-dimensional model, by Monday or even Wednesday, but you may want to see what it looks like for yourself. And again, I would look at my exercise 1 through 3 of computer graphics, especially if you just have absolutely never used Rhino. But we can extrude curve, and we can spell extrude curve correctly. There we go. And as you can see, I can immediately make a box. Well, how big do I want it to be? Maybe I want it to be 15 feet. Wonderful. And it'll show us a wireframe by default, but if you click on this down arrow and go to shaded, of course now we can really start to see what that wall looks like. Or even just kind of a basic massing model, right? Of course we could also just delete the inside and really start to get a feel. Now, in my case, I forgot to add some of those lines, so that's why it's kind of missing in these areas. But as you can see, I mean, don't get me wrong, I don't expect anybody to suddenly, oh man, I'm going to try and digitally model my thing even though I've never taken computer graphics. I do not expect that. However, if you've taken computer graphics, you already know, right? That this is obviously a viable tool. You can start to wire cut this thing out. You could really start to mess and manipulate with some of this stuff. But again, last but not least, let's get this into Illustrator. And what I need to do is always make a copy because I never know if I'm going to mess up. I can't tell you how many times I've messed up in the digital realm. But I may want to copy, and I may want to actually, oh, thank goodness, Rhino 8 now actually copies the stuff that you have hidden. That was not a thing back in the day. It was very annoying because you'd actually have some layers off, you'd copy it and be like, oh my God, I'm missing all the layers that I wanted to copy. Now, the latest Rhino 8 update has actually solved some of that stuff. So again, I just love this program. But let's say I actually want to turn it into a line drawing for that Wednesday pinup next week. Let's do it. And what scale do we need it? 1/32? Let's do it, right? So we have to do a little bit of calculation. So I just need to know my paper size, and I already actually expressed how big it was. In our case, we do need to do a little bit of a calculation. So I'll pull up my calculator, and in my case, 1/32, that means I can fit 32 feet per inch. Well, that's great, because if I have an 18 by 24, I already know how many feet I could possibly put on a piece of paper, no? Especially if I already know the scale and the size of the paper, which is why I give you those things. In my case, I'm going to start with the long end, so 24 times 32. And I know that my paper is going to cover 768 feet. Wonderful. So I'm going to do a rectangle. And do 768 foot symbol. Now I know it looks kind of big, but again, what we're doing is actually scaling it to the paper, right? And then 18 times 32. I don't feel like doing that in my head today. So 18 times 32. 576. Wonderful. 576 feet. So relatively speaking, this is how big the entire drawing is. 1/32, 18 by 24. Now hold that in mind, because we'll need to take the entire thing, file, export selected. And this is where you do have a couple of options. Most of the time I prefer actually a DWG. It just works better for my computer. Usually I'm using an old version of Illustrator at home. I still kind of, have some old stuff that I don't want to get rid of the plugins on it, so I just don't update it because in fear of losing those plugins. So if you're like me, just save it as a DWG and you'll have no problem. However, some of us might want to take in the image that we either traced off of, or maybe that parking lot that we want to keep in there. So I would actually say PDF it. So don't get me wrong, I'll do both today, but export selected, DWG, we'll open that in Illustrator. And you can do an Illustrator file too, but just make sure you don't change the scale. So in my case, there is actually an Adobe Illustrator file now. So we'll save that to the desktop and we'll call it tutorial for today, literally. Export, and it's gonna say, hey, do you wanna preserve the model scale? Well, hell no. Why? Because this is at 1:1 scale. It's not even gonna fit on the page. In fact, some of you guys accidentally do this sometimes and you're like, sir, where is it? I'm like, it's there. It's just literally that size, right? So it's actually, you can't see it, right? Because the paper's too small. But in our case, snapshot of the current view, no big deal, and we'll save that one off. However, let's say there was an image under this, and maybe let's take this guy. Again, I know I'm kind of faking it until I make it today, but practice what I preach, not what I do, right? As I say. So let's take that piece. In my case, if I want to take that and turn it into a PDF, that way I can get the raster, the image, and the lines, the vectors. I can do that with this incredible invention made in 1992, I think. PDFs, right? Still, I don't know what it stands for. Aaron, do you know what it stands for?
PDF.
Yeah.
Portable document format.
That's why he's here. All right. So in our case, I'd go to print, boop. And just similar actually to the laser cutter. In our case, I need to set my paper size. It's not 24 by 36 in this case. I need it 18 by 24. Yeah, that's also known as an ARC-C. We'll go with an 18 by 24. We'll select window and set that window to our paper size. It's almost too easy. We'll hit enter and voila, we have a perfectly scaled drawing. Seriously. I like doing it this method because, well, you almost can't go wrong. And let's face it, in studio, I need all kinds of different pieces of paper. I need all kinds of scales, all kinds of sizes. So I don't know about you, but I'd rather just calculate it out, right, manually. That way I actually know it's right. In fact, we had a student, or not a student, another professor one time about 5 years ago, where he produced a site model, right, and it was completely off. And he was like super awesome. He went to all these crazy schools, super digital guy, and he kept getting the scale wrong, right? But it was funny because eventually they turned to me and go, Chris, can you get this to scale? Did my method. It was right the first time, right? So anyway, just throwing that out there for a sec. In our case, 300 dots per inch, or DPI, is pretty good. ArcC, and I'll hit print. It's going to essentially save it as a PDF. So at least tutorial for today. And we'll put that on the desktop. If you guys know me in computer graphics, you know that I like to spend the least amount of time possible in Illustrator. So, oh my god, where did Illustrator go? There it is. Oh my gosh, 2025 is so much better than 2026. I don't know who needs to hear this, but if you installed 2026 by accident, oh my goodness, there was something definitely wrong with it. But I've been using 2025. And let's go ahead and actually open up both of those files just so you can kind of see what to do with both of those. Again, I know a lot of this is review for some of us. You've been doing this like for a year now. So again, you're more than welcome to start to think about questions you maybe want to ask next, because I'm just going to open up the next panel after this for just questions, whether it's modeling questions, whatever it may be. In our case, let's go to desktop, tutorial for the day. I don't think I can open both at the same time. Oh my gosh. I want to freeze my computer. Anyway. But as you can see, we got our piece. We can also do Command R and get that dimension. So from 0 to, looks like 18. Ooh, something seems off there. Let's get our dimensions of this one. PDF should be absolutely correct, just because we used an ArcD. Yeah, so that's 24. And in my case, it seems like it just chose a generic artboard. That's okay, because we can change the artboard. We can go to File, Document Setup, Edit Artboards, and essentially click on this artboard and go, oh yeah, it's a 11 by 17. I definitely need something bigger than that. So I'll go with 24 inches and 18 inches, just because that was what I established that rectangle to be. Now, once I've got that piece, I can zoom out a little bit. I can line up to one corner, and naturally, Illustrator does that pretty well for us. I'll take the other corner, and oh my gosh, I'll hold Shift so that it stays proportional. And in our case, it should line up pretty darn well. Now, no, I don't want to line it up to here, because then that would be off scale, right? But relatively speaking, we got pretty close. It should be exact, but it does seem actually a little bit off. So I would want to double check that. Again, it could be a few things. My rectangle could be slightly wrong, but I could also fake it till I make it. In the other case, as you can see, the PDF does pretty well. It keeps the image, but it also smashes everything together, so do be careful, right? In our case, what's nice about the DWG method, or even the AI file method, is we can immediately change these. So for Wednesday, I may want to actually just take all my topography. Awesome. Definitely don't want orange topography, so I'll go with like a slight gray. And nicely enough, it actually automatically updates as I go. I love that fact about it. I'm gonna go ahead and click it. As you guys know or may not know, most of the time topography actually in site plans are dashed. So if you go to Stroke and you go to some more advanced settings in Stroke, oops, show options, you can actually select a dash line. And in our case, you can actually get pretty darn close. I typically choose about a 3 or a 4. And voila. But I'm definitely not selecting one line at a time in Illustrator. Let's face it, that's a really good way to like grow old and grumpy. So in our case, always go to your layers and click the invisible box. Of course, if you're in computer graphics, you know what I mean. You click on the invisible box, it selects everything in that layer. It's looking a little too thick, so I'm gonna go with, say, 0.55, enter, and voila. Next thing is maybe my buildings or those walls that I did in Poche. And I do still have the ability to delete lines in here, right? So, you know, even if like I found, oh man, I forgot to delete those lines, or maybe I do turn them in actually into somewhat of a construction line, let's do that. Actually, that's a good point to go over, because not every single line will come out of the printer. In fact, they say the smallest line that could be produced by a 600 DPI printer is 0.125 point. But as you can see, it's pretty small. And then arguably we can even change that color in order to very much be like a construction line. Arguably can't even see it at certain distances. However, not to be fooled, this is a digital computer, and let's face it, it is pixelated. There's only so many pixels on a screen. That's why it doesn't actually show it. But in the real world, that is something you might want to test. In my case, you'll notice that when you click on the hatch, excuse me, it comes in as a fill, right? So you can take that piece and of course start to fill it. Now in my case, it looks like I accidentally clicked on the other piece, so I may actually want to even isolate it and find out what that is. Oops, I accidentally put it all in the walls layer. So I might have to click on it one at a time. So there it is. There's that fill versus the stroke. So in my case, maybe a nice poche. Ooh, that's a nice poche. We'll go with that one. In my case right here. And as you can see, selecting lines in Illustrator is absolutely pulling teeth. It doesn't know what to do. And then if you select both, it's like, oh, I really don't know what to do, right? There we go. So we'll change that to a thick line. Not that thick. Bless you. We'll go with like 0.125. Another thing that I can do is once I've selected a line, I can do the eyedropper tool and actually just select what I want to copy. So something like that. And it looks like I have accidentally multiple lines in there, which would explain some things. There we go. Let's take that last one. And let's go with that thick line. And maybe like 0.25. But as you can see, I don't know about you, but way easier than doing this in Rhino. And arguably now I just have to print it. So not a big deal there. Another thing that's kind of nice is, well, if I select one item, I can go to select, same, and appearance, or fill color, or the same fill and stroke, those kinds of things. And it's gonna hopefully actually grab all the ones that I'm talking about. And of course it did, thank you. But we can change that all at the same time. Again, there is no reason to sit here and try and select things in Illustrator. Maybe I go with red stone, I don't know. Nah, that looks a little weird. So let's get that red fill and maybe go maybe a little darker. Ooh, that definitely has a stone quality to it. And voila, I have my floor plans for Wednesday. Next thing I could do is either text in Rhino or text, right? I could say the room. But again, what's really nice about Illustrator and not Photoshop is that it is a vector program. So even if I zoom onto this, it'll never be pixelated. Where if I did that in Photoshop, it would definitely become a series of squares. So again, I know I'm trying to cover a lot of bases here today, guys, but that does conclude at 2 o'clock. But I do want to open it to questions, whether it be Illustrator or Rhino. So is there anything somebody wants me to cover again, or model real quick, or anything like that? Hopefully helpful, some of us. I know if you've never actually used Rhino, that was probably like, oh my gosh, I got to try this now, right? For some of us, probably absolutely a review, like, oh yeah, I forgot I could do that. So obviously the point of this, now no, there's probably no other professor really outside of San Diego College that's going to do this for you and teach you and kind of hold your hand through this. So now's the time for questions, guys, because one day you'll just be expected to figure it out on your own. And then you'll call me and be like, Professor Barrett, please help. Yes, Ethan.
Can you model a slanted roof?
Slanted roof, absolutely. First, I'd want to decide that roof. So you'll notice I have a top view, a front view, a side view. So let's draw it first, right? Let's get the Wacom pen going. And maybe I want a very specific roof. I'm going to get this piece and be like, whoop. Maybe I wanted to do something like that. Sweet. Looks pretty slanted. And if I wanted to dial it in, I could choose Gumball and really dial that in, right? I can get it very close, and obviously I'm just kind of faking it until I make it for the sake of tutorial. I'd want some thickness to it, right? So, I mean, we could just extrude this and add thickness. So we'll take that piece, let's find it. Oh, there it is. And it's not looking too great for this model, so I'm gonna at least align it with that, right? But as you can see, it's gonna rotate that a little bit. We can extrude it, just like any other curve. We can go, okay, well, I want it to be about this big. And if that's looking weird for you, you can always reset this by that impossibly hard white little circle to hit. And you just say reset gumball. So auto reset or just reset the gumball, right? So again, super useful in many cases. I don't even think I show my computer graphics sometimes, that thing. But that's actually looking a little better. But right now it's still technically two-dimensional. Like you kind of see it's like, ooh, there's almost like, you can't tell what side's what. So I'm gonna offset surface. Offset surf. I'm gonna say, well, maybe I want this roof to be, I don't know, 12 inches. You can actually change the direction too. So if you click on those arrows, you can say, well, I want it to offset up or I want it to offset down. It makes a lot of sense to offset it up right now because otherwise it's gonna go right into the building. Enter, and voila. We can also even start to test the shade and shadow of it. So another thing that we can do is like the sun, which if you want more about like rendering and stuff, it's in all the parts of exercise 3. Exercise 1, or exercise 3, part 1, 2, 3. But there is some pretty awesome sun settings. We can quite literally, let's not go to Africa. We can take it quite literally to where we are, or Mexico, or anyway, for the sake of tutorial, I'll just kind of put it anywhere. More than often, I usually actually just use manual control. Otherwise, my computer starts to freak out and be like, what time is it? But in our case, if you go to rendered view, you can immediately start to see what that sun looks like. And I can't tell you how awesome that is. Now, I don't know about you, but I really like the Wacom tool because I can get really close with my cursor. And I can really start to dial in what that looks like. So in my case, and it should actually change it in real time. Right now it's like high noon. And it doesn't want me to change it. What's going on here? Try that again. Oh, there we go. As you can see, we can do like a violet hour, right, with some really long shadows. Led Zeppelin would be proud. Shadows taller than our souls. But in our case, it really starts to even add that yellowing that you would find at the violet hour or the golden hour of time. You know, the next thing that I could do, especially if I wanted to turn that, you know, into the rest of the building, I could take this piece and elongate it. Boop. And I could trim it right off, well, as long as it's all the way through, right? So let's make it all the way through. Oop, yeah, need it to be a little bit over here, a little bit over there. Now, of course, this is by no means what you know, Brandon should do, but for the sake of tutorial, I always feel like I have to say that because there are some students that are like, but sir, you did this on mine. And I was like, well, I didn't mean for you to actually do it. But we'll take that piece, trim it, T-R-I-M, and we'll click on the piece that we don't want. See what I mean? Pretty intuitive. Helpful?
Yeah, definitely.
Good question. Any others, guys?
How do we set the sun to be more accurate to our map?
Yeah, you totally can. And honestly, there's probably better tutorials than mine at this very moment. But you obviously take off manual control. And you'd probably want to do this in a rendered view. That way you can kind of see what's happening. But essentially, you'd want to zoom into this or actually just search it. So, I don't know, Comal County. That, I mean, it might find it. I doubt it. Oh, wow, there's a Comal County in Africa? I doubt it. So, obviously, I want to get as close as possible first. To be fair, you only have to get near to the closest city, right? It's not like you have to find the exact spot. You'll notice that there's not a huge difference, actually, between probably New Braunfels and our site, right? So, in my case, if I typed in New... Help me out here. How do you spell Braunfels? Is it B-A-U-N? Something like that. Now, obviously, if I just clicked on San Antonio, that's probably accurate enough too. So, I mean, seriously, the sun's only doing so much at different latitudes and longitudes. But I get your point. But in our case, it won't let me zoom in, which is kind of annoying. But you'd want to get as close as possible using that search and or time zone, right? But then you could really dial in the time here, right? So as you can see on this scale, you see kind of the violet hours being used there. You also see that there's the year. So if we wanted to show it in January versus March versus June, or yeah, April, May, June, July, August, September, October, November, December. That is how you would do it. So, I mean, don't get me wrong, that's a pretty sophisticated idea to have your money shot and right at the very corner or something it says 9 a.m. There you go. This is exactly what my project or from this view will look like at 9:30 a.m. on a July morning. Is that helpful?
Yes.
Okay. Good questions. Any others, guys? Fair enough. We'll end it there for today.